keep the conversation going. My name is Leah Gilliam. I'm the VP of Strategy and Innovation at Girls Who Code. Girls Who Code has a single mission to close the gender and opportunity gaps that stop young women from succeeding in computer science. As someone who makes games in my not very much free time, I know that particularly for underrepresented groups, design can be a great point of entry for eventually getting to things like coding. So I was really happy when Michelle asked me to moderate this panel, and it's a great pleasure to introduce these three to you. They'll be talking from a couple of different perspectives. The framing mechanism really is just, I've asked them, can you give us a few takeaways from your approach and anything that has surprised you in working with youth in creating games? I always like to figure out who's in the room. So are there educators in the room? Just maybe a hand, show of hands. That's great. Designers? Developers? Designer developers? Okay, yeah, great. Thanks so much, you guys. So Josh Weisgrau, Tracey Gray, Austin Olney. I'm gonna let you guys take it away.
All right. I think I'm first. So I work with Digital Promise and Digital Promise Global. I direct a number of programs in the area of maker learning. And what I'm going to talk about today is this one program called the Learning Studios. So that is a pilot we've been running for a year now, where we've been working with a little over 60 schools in 11 countries around the world, working at the classroom level with an educator or sometimes a small group of educators who are working with their students on sort of design-centered learning about design and through design with an eye towards sort of social innovation and social entrepreneurship. So these programs have fit into a very diverse range of contexts, both locations, age groups. We have everything from second grade classrooms to high school CTE medical engineering program. So we're working with a broad group, kind of looking at kind of themes and practices in this kind of learning. There's some research attached to it. Keep an eye out for a white paper in like a month. So the Learning Studio program, we are, as I mentioned, a global network of schools, and sort of loosely framed, what we're trying to do is help teachers to empower their students as empathetic and compassionate creators and change makers. So we want to work with all educators who want to do that. So this is going to become an open invitation very soon after we move out of this pilot phase. But one of the things we did over this last year is each semester we had a big challenge. So we offered the teachers a lot of different kinds of supports that I'll get into on the next slide. But the main thing I'm going to talk about today was our spring challenge. So this ran from about January through May. And the prompt sort of framed as a design prompt that maybe we've seen before. From a formatting perspective, how might we create a digital or analog game to help players learn something new? So pretty simple and open-ended prompt that allowed the teachers to sort of fold in what works best for their context, whether that is the second grade classroom or the high school program, whether they're a math teacher or they're working in a library, which we'll talk about a little more detail of one of those groups. The not just design a game, but design a game for learning, help to build in that social innovation piece that we're working towards, and also helped the teachers build in a structure for which, if they are in a context where they're responsible for specific content knowledge, they could frame a slightly more constrained prompt around that. So the role we play is. You may have seen on the first slide, we are supported by HP and Microsoft in this program. So one thing is that all of the schools received a similar package of equipment around, sort of those companies came to us and said, we have this computer called the Sprout. I don't know if you've seen it, but it includes a 3D scanner and some other things. And we're working on a partnership with Dremel 3D printers and said, we think this package of equipment could be really useful for schools. Can you bring your pedagogical expertise to help teachers and help us figure out how that works? So that's where this program came from. So schools received those things. We also were able to work with companies like Makey to get them that product. And in this challenge, we worked with GameStar Mechanic to give everybody access to that platform. And then mostly our role has been to support the teachers as they support the students. So we do that through an online community. We do that through access to us one-on-one when they need it, access to each other, webinars. So we kicked this off with a game design webinar with the people you see on the screen. And then as we build, you saw those prompts are really broad, but we try to provide pathways for students to learn through them with smaller projects that they can gear up. So we see, I mentioned this challenge ran from like January to May. Most of the schools were working on the actual challenge for 4 to 6 weeks. And for the 2 months before that, they were working on other things related to, other smaller projects related to build a tabletop carnival and make a sort of a Kane's Arcade type of project, or remix a video game in Scratch, or do a sound machine with the Makey Makey. Something a little more involved than a banana piano, we hoped. And then the other thing that this program enables is virtual exchange. So we have this global network, and the game design created a really, really great platform to facilitate virtual exchange. It wasn't just design a thing and then share it. It was design a thing and then play test it. So virtual sort of play testing across borders or across the country, depending on which connections we were able to make between the schools. So that becomes the photos we see here are clips from Skype sessions where kids were play testing each other's games. So really quickly, one of the games, so this came out of a library, a middle school library in Greenville, South Carolina. And so there weren't those sort of content constraints, and which enabled the kids to explore some really interesting stuff. They called this game The Struggles Are Real, and it was their way of showing the adults like what teenage life is really like what is adolescent life all about. So they made an analog game, which is actually an interesting thing that a lot of students chose to do that, even given the option to make a digital game, and we can talk about that if we have time. But what they did is they 3D printed emojis to make the game pieces. So they brought the digital into the analog world because they recognized the digital world is a really important part of what they needed to show about their experience. And they modeled it loosely after the game of life. I'm going to my notes for this because, as I mentioned, I work with the teachers, and the notes are specifically from the teacher who facilitated this. So the players gain or lose popularity points and mental health points. They're trying to get money. So you see where the kids' perspective is with this. But what it got really interesting is they started to look at paths where sometimes you get to choose the path, and sometimes the path is chosen for you. So what happens, based on your parents' job or your parents' salary? Do you have access to the internet at home? So they were looking at things like that and trying to navigate those complexities in their board game. So really, that's the kind of thinking that we want to see, right? So learning, design-based, maker-centered learning is not as much about learning to make as it is learning through making, and what are the complexities of the system that we're exposing, and how can they really think about the sort of the whole world through this lens? What are the, as they run into these things, they're forced to sort of see them as they figure out how to model them, right? What are these sort of social inequalities that are driving these choices or not choices? What are truly choices? They're running into all of that as middle school students designing a board game. So you walk into the library, you see this thing, they're like, oh, it's cute. The kids are making the game of life, but they're actually really trying to model life, and that is incredibly complex and incredibly metacognitive. So I have more notes, and I can share them, but I want to keep moving.
Like 3 minutes.
Great. I think I'm right on schedule. So I just think that project is super interesting as they sort of were faced with that, and having one of the important things is we see technology in schools a lot of times sort of trying to replace teachers. But the reality is the only way to work students through that thinking is with another human and another group of humans. So it's all of these things complement each other, and the really important thing there is kids running into walls while creating to help them kind of build their own mental models of their lives in the world. So as I mentioned, my job writ large is about maker learning, and so this is kind of the first time that I had really been exposed to sort of something involving gaming. I own a PlayStation, but I don't really use it. I'm not a gamer. I've never really identified like that. With my team, we're sort of looking at this and we're like, this looks like, I think game design could be a really great challenge for a lot of reasons. And when we talk about maker learning, we talk about 3 core values that we try to bake into all of our sort of curricular approaches to this. One is student agency. So certainly, giving just any sort of design the thing that you want to design is going to grant agency, and that's sort of a core of most of the prompts that we design. But gaming, we know a lot of the kids are coming in as gamers, and so this is sort of an authentic part of their experience for many of them. For some, it may not be, and that's we also have to recognize that like any sort of set of parameters we create is not going to be universal. And the last thing that I think sets maker-centered learning apart from some other sort of student engagement types of pedagogies is a real focus on audience and on sharing, whether that's sort of human-centered design or in this case playtesting. And I think creating a focus on we're going to design for users. We understand those users because there are people who play games like us, and then we're going to test with those users is a really accessible way to bring students into that. And then the last thing, I'll end with some of my questions from this, or my one question that I hinted at, and we can revisit it in the Q&A, which is students were in all of these classrooms were given the option to create a digital game, an analog game, a physical game. Most of them created analog games, board games, card games, and we weren't, we're not sure why. Our research didn't really focus on that. I have some theories that I'm going to look at the screen to remember because I just wrote them down out of my head. The first idea that was like, is this some kind of reverse novelty, right? Like they spend all of their time working with digital games and they wanted to explore like a board game. Is it that creating in that context is easier when working in a group? For the vast majority of these projects, they were implemented as group work. And are there really good mechanisms for collaborative design work on virtual game design? Again, as I mentioned, I'm sort of a novice to that part of the field, so that's kind of a question for the group. Maybe it was just a simpler structure for them to understand and design when they were trying to model more complex structures on top of it. And a little bit, some of it might have had to do with their own identity. Do they all identify as gamers? Were we, for some reason, represented by a group who maybe don't see themselves in that world? I think there's potentially sort of access and identity questions related to potentially gender and other sort of areas there too. So more things to explore in the Q&A, but I'll hand it off.
Thanks, Josh. You said down there.
So my name is Tracey Gray, and I'm the founder and president of the Sankofa Global Project. Our mission is to increase the number of women and people of color in science, technology, engineering, art, and math, and we do that through a plethora of ways, 3 of which being the first in working with schools, organizations, and communities to just even empower them and to have an understanding of what STEAM education is. And I say that because in many of the communities that I've approached and gone working with, I always start with questions because I never want to assume that people know something when they don't know something, or they may know something more than I know. And so when I've gone into many communities, and let me just start by saying that I've been a classroom teacher, I've been a principal, and I started this organization as I was leading a school in California. As I talk with students at Stanford, USC, UCLA, at San Francisco State, my own alma mater, talking with them about their experiences in computer science and students in the sciences overall, and many of them who come from cities like Detroit and Baltimore and Chicago, many of whom were first-generation students in these predominantly white institutions, and I'm talking specifically about African-American students, and their experiences in failure in the sciences, and particularly in computer science, and their barriers that they were facing. And a lot of them spoke about the barriers of not having project-based learning as a framework to prepare them for computer science, which I thought was very fascinating. I'm not a computer scientist. I find it fascinating in that these students were sharing their experiences and their failures in not being able to grow and to achieve the goals that they wanted to as students in the sciences because they didn't have the background knowledge that many of their other counterparts had come in contact with. I've been very privileged to have taught in some amazing institutions in New York and in California, mainly private and independent schools. But I've also kept a pulse in public schools and charter schools and seeing what people have access to. And so a lot of my research in even starting my organization was based on that. And so I did some projects with some students in West Oakland. I've done projects with students in Brooklyn, in Manhattan, in how to approach STEAM, not STEM, but STEAM. And part of that is it's brought me back to, and I was sharing with my fellow panelists here, one of my first and best experiences is teaching kindergarten, because kindergartners are raw. They bring their whole selves to any environment that they're in. And I love that component that students bring to their learning. And I found that when talking with middle school and high school students that they were a bit more reticent about bringing their whole selves in any experience, and even when it came to project-based learning and being a maker. I'm very fortunate that I had an exhibit at the World Maker Fair. Okay, 5 seconds? 5 minutes. Okay. At the Maker Fair, at the Maker Fair, and so I bring all of those experiences in gaming, if you will. Down. Okay. So I saw this on the Games for Change website, and I thought about this, and I thought it's an amazing opportunity for students to build games and develop them by local stories and immigrant stories, climate change, future communities. And I see this as an amazing opportunity for students to build an actual game, or even build something that's a computer game. And I don't know how many communities even know that this exists. And so part of my objective is making sure that people have access to these types of opportunities. Inquiry. For me, as an educator, I think that's first. You have to unlock the potential for students to be collaborative, to have opportunities to work together, to ask questions, and even to want to have hands-on exhibits. I do what we call I do projects around tinkering and design for students, and I'm very fortunate that I was able to do something with the NYU Makerspace this past June during the Week of Making, where there's the SS Columbia project. And the Design for America students built an actual game to talk about the SS Columbia, which is a steamship. They want to help students to understand how a steamship works, and so they built a game. And so some of the students were asking, well, are you gonna make this into a computer game at one time? And so that was some of the feedback that the other students took, the NYU students took away from that. I really believe in community engagement when it comes to any kind of STEM or STEAM activities. And when it comes to working with different communities, I found, in the communities that I serve, that it is equally important to work with the students, but also work with the teachers, the families, and the communities to make sure that students have access. One of the things I'm very fortunate, again, I have an exhibit at the Maker Faire coming up in September, and so we're gonna be working with some of the community-based organizations just to get the information out that this is something that's happening. And we want people to be able to participate fully, but it's going to take not just the students, it's going to take the parents and the communities, because many people don't even know. Many people didn't know about the Games for Change. And so making sure that people have access is really important to me. Making sure that all the voices are heard. I had a tech education conference back in April, bringing families and school leaders, superintendents, the borough president, cooperating organizations to come together just to talk about what is it going to take to make sure everybody's voice is heard when it comes to either game development, when it comes to science. Access has been a hallmark of what we're doing.
All right. Great. How's everyone doing? Good. So my name is Austin, and I work up at the White Plains Public Library. Doesn't say it up there, but I work just north of the city, and I teach technology classes to really all ages, but I focus on digital technology, and one of the big things that I do is video game design. Okay, so not only do I work at the White Plains Public Library, but I also go and I visit other libraries to teach video game design to, usually it's the middle school age children, and there's a big need to teach kids video game design, and I totally agree with it, because it sort of is like the culmination of all these different skill sets under one platform, because a video game, you know, it has audio in it, it's got animations, you got models, that you need to make, music, and of course coding. So it's all these things coming together into one in one app. Okay, so I love teaching video game design, and it's so easy to get kids excited about it because a lot of kids are playing games these days, and there's some really good educational value to making games. So you can see I put some of the icons of the different applications that I use, but ultimately what I'm trying to do is to get kids to the point where they can use the Unity platform. So I don't know if you guys have heard of Unity. It's a pretty big name in the video game design community. There's a free edition. Yeah, so it's really good to use because you can learn to use Unity and you can export your product to all kinds of different platforms. So you can make a virtual reality game, an augmented reality game, Android phone app. You can make a web app. So all from the same program. So you teach kids to use Unity, and they can really use that one skill set to do many different things. So I usually don't start off with Unity when I'm teaching kids video game design. I usually start with Scratch, which I'm sure some of you have heard of. If you haven't, Scratch is a website. It's a really good way to begin to learn how to code, how to learn computer programming, and how to make a game. And not only can you make games, but you can make animations. And in fact, I use that as kind of like an entry point for a lot of kids because they might not be interested in computer programming, and it's really hard to sell them on do you guys want to learn how to program? But it's easier to sell it as I'll show you how to make an animated story. I'll show you how to make a cartoon. Okay? And so you can use these different pieces in the program to create your very own animation. You can create something as simple as two characters having a conversation with each other. Okay? And the kids will learn how to do that, and they'll have a ton of fun doing it, and it's really easy to get them started with that, and it's really perpetual. They'll just keep it going. But at the same time, they're learning core computer programming skills. So Scratch is a great beginning. And from Scratch, I would go to Alice 3D. It's kind of like the sequel to Scratch. They're in no way affiliated. It's made by Carnegie Mellon, and that it's basically Scratch in 3D. That's how I look at it. So you have that third dimension where Scratch apps are your typical 2D games, side scrollers. They're flat sprite games where you have 2 dimensions. So you got your X and your Y. Whereas with Alice, you have that sense of depth, and you have this whole world that you can create. And while the kids are creating the worlds, they're learning the Java programming language. So they're stepping it up a little bit and learning a little bit more about programming. And after that, I'll go to Roblox, which is huge right now. A lot of kids they like playing Roblox, and it's basically a user. It's a user-created platform, essentially, in the sense that the games that the kids are playing in the Roblox universe are games that are made by other users. So it's very user-created. And Roblox is like an introduction to Unity. Okay, so it's like a simplified Unity, and that they're going to be using the Lua programming language, but they don't even have to code using Roblox. They can actually pull in user-created content, and it's really easy to just drag in. Oh, you want to make a car game? You can drag in a car, and you can move your character around and hop in that car and drive around. It's really easy, and it's one of those ones where the kids can just take off with it. And like I said, Unity, where that's the ultimate. That's what a lot of professionals are using, and that's the goal. Okay, and so you can see that this kid is really excited about what we were doing there. That's totally staged. But so and the point of this slide is just to show the one on the right is not staged. So that was a girl using a Oculus Rift headset. And we did a program where kids could make a game in Roblox and then actually hop into the game that they made using the virtual reality headsets. And it's really simple to do. And it's really fulfilling, and it gets the kids excited, which is great. And so the point of this slide was just to show that really what it comes down to, whatever the kid that comes into the room, it's really Are they excited or are they not excited? That's the biggest difference with the kids that I see. And it doesn't matter, you know, whatever their gender is, you know, it's are they into it? And when the kid is into it, it's really easy to kind of direct that energy and kind of, you know, okay, you point them towards Scratch. Okay, Scratch, you can use this to make animations, and you get them going with that. But the kids who aren't motivated, that's where you have to, like I said, you have to sell it in a different way and try to break it down for them. A lot of kids are playing games, so if you tap into that and you ask them, really, a lot of times what I'll start off my classes with is asking the kids, what kind of games do you play? And usually I put it to the kids and I say, all right, what kind of game do you want to make? What kind of game do you want me to make and show you how to make? And they'll come up with ideas, and I'll kind of break down the different aspects of whatever particular game that is. It could be something like, I want to have a character that can jump, okay? And we'll break down, well, what is a jump? And I'll ask the kids, well, what is a jump? Well, it's, you know, to them it's, well, they jump. What do you mean? And then I'll explain to them, well, a jump is someone going up and then coming down, and let's program that. So, and then you can start to see the light bulbs happening, which takes me to this. It's really the ideas it's the ideas coming up with good ideas is the hardest part about game design that I've found. And whether it's ideas for what kind of game to make or ideas for how to fix the particular problem you're having with your game that you're going for. Because a lot of times it's easy to have the vision of the game that you want to make. But to make that vision happen, there's a lot of barriers like we were talking about before. And a lot of times you got to think outside of the box to solve the problems, and think outside of the box just to go in a different direction as far as what game you want to make. So thumbs up.
Thanks so much. Since we don't have a lot of time and we're cutting into the next session, maybe I'll just open the floor to questions, and then we've chatted a bit amongst ourselves, so we can also chat a bit, because I have a few notes of things we can talk about. But are there questions just from the audience about some of the different approaches here, different organizations, anything we can help you with? Yeah. Yes.
My question is for Austin.
Yeah.
Have your students entered any game competitions? And if so, which ones?
Good question. Honestly, I want to say no, as far as I can think. I'm not. Usually, what I do is an introduction to video game design. So it would be nice if I followed these kids and got them, you know, through the whole process, and ultimately got them to make a game, publish it, and you know, put it in a contest. But that's actually a good idea, and honestly, I haven't thought about it. But I might in the future.
Yeah, and so if I could follow up with anybody on the panel. So I have students who make games, and we actually teach game design and game coding, and we do a lot with Game Maker and also some Unity, but we haven't gotten to the point where they're really independent in Unity. And a lot of the game competitions that I've looked at, the one that you mentioned, they have specific tools that you have to be using or curriculums that you have to be following. So I was looking for something more generic. And I know the National STEM Challenge is one, but something maybe on a smaller level with just more opportunities.
Where are you?
I teach at Elizabeth Ford High School, which is south of Pittsburgh.
Okay. Have you ever thought of putting one together yourself? Seriously, yeah.
So we've done game jams.
Yeah,
Not
okay.
really any so no, actually, in answer to your question, one word answer, no.
I think there's so many opportunities, and there's agency in you and your students designing a contest where for the state, why not for the whole state, that you and your cohorts could do something together. I always find that if there's not something that exists, that I'm going to create it myself.
Yeah, if you're south of Pittsburgh, CMU is a great contact, and yeah. I mean, I think it is really interesting, just this sort of larger question about what are you building kids to, towards. Austin, you said something that I thought was interesting, which was that your goal is to ultimately have kids working in unity. And so it struck me that you've scaffolded your relationship so that kids who are coming into the library, they're starting off with Scratch and then Alice and then Roblox and then they go to Unity. And I just was sort of curious about that particular kind of pathway, and what happens if someone starts with Scratch and then wanders off and does something else. What do you mean when you say your ultimate goal is to have kids working in Unity?
Well, the ultimate goal, that's a personal choice for me, as far as getting them to use Unity, because like I said, you can do so many different things with the Unity platform. So I feel that if a kid can learn how to use Unity, they have the most options available. Because you can make 2D games, just like a Scratch game, in Unity. Pretty much anything you can do in the other programs, you can do in Unity. And a lot of times kids start with Unity. I've done classes where it's, kids have never game designed in their life, and I'll start them right with Unity. And a lot of it is just understanding the program and having the right scripts to give them. And that's just because personally, I use it a lot. And, I'm still experimenting with what is the best way to get a kid to start with Unity. And right now, we'll start them with Scratch, actually.
Josh, did you have something? Or is that earlier?
Sure. No, I'm just thinking about the, sort of, I don't know. I don't know Unity. I don't know a lot of the tools, and I think that's part of the reason why an approach I generally take is this sort of more agnostic approach. Use the tools to open up the ideas. And so a lot of the way that's constructed is less about scaffolding from the front to the back and more from the back to the front. Mm-hmm. So the first thing that the kids are going to see in 4 months of working on this challenge is the big challenge prompt. And then they're going to not necessarily think about that for a while. Then they're going to think, then they can start to explore the pathways they might use to get it. So, again, a ton of these kids chose to sort of explore these more analog pathways, and the projects that led up to it. We had a series of projects that built through Scratch and other things, and left it up to them to see where they go. And I think that's when we do it that way, I'm always surprised at the paths they choose to follow.
I thought that was a great how might we is like a great classic design prompt as well. Yes. Very open-ended, so that people can sort of come in with whatever skills or tools that they have. So I appreciated that. Other questions, comments?
Crickets.
Yeah.
So I'll reiterate the sort of message of like if the experience you're looking for isn't out there, yes, find your partners and make it yourself. I know Elizabeth Forward, I know Todd. Let's talk. But even if you don't know people on this panel, talk. Create that experience. Find your partners, find your network, and make the challenge you want to solve.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why just in our quick conversations, I thought it would be interesting for Josh to focus on the virtual playtesting, because virtual playtesting just via Skype seemed like a really nice way of kind of connecting classrooms in an interactive way. So that's another thing too, is even if you meet another person, another teacher, someone else here who does what it is you do, who has working with a population a similar age, just connect and play one another's games. That's an interesting way might be an interesting way to approach it. No shame in starting in leaving early. I know you guys have other panels to get to. Thanks so much for attending. And thank you, Tracy, Austin, Josh, for sharing your practices and experiences with us. Thanks so much.
Awesome, thank you.